Hey there, my name is Rachael.
I'm Annie.
And I'm Shelby. And welcome to the Magdala Podcast.
We know from experience that pornography, masturbation, and other sexual addictions are not just a guy problem.
The need for women to be accompanied in their journey toward healing from addiction has gone sorely unmet, and that's why we're here.
Magdala is a space where women can find hope, healing, and freedom from sexual addiction through support, community, and accountability.
Here on the podcast, you'll find everything from testimonies to practical advice to discussions on how to live fully as a Catholic woman.
You are not alone, and wherever you are on your journey, we welcome you to this table.
Well, I think we should start in a place of vulnerability, and it's this. As I sit here for this episode, I realize in petting my legs, I missed a spot shaving. You know what I'm talking about when you have that one slip and you're like, so I will be thinking about that this entire episode that we talk. So I hope you can help keep us on track. But we're not talking about relationship with the body, though that could be another episode. In fact, that's in our curriculum. So join a small group. You know what I mean? There's actually two parts to that. Okay.
So
on the front. Okay.
So
Important. But today we are talking about restoration of relationship with creation and created goods. So we have already been through the relationship with God, relationship with others, and relationship with self. And the fourth primary relationship is with creation. And so that is a whole big potluck of many different things. So we're going to try to touch a little bit on a few things and get a holistic view and then see sort of how we go. But the reality is that sexual sin disrupts our relationship with the world around us, period. And that includes all sorts of created goods, material goods. There are many things that fall into that category. But Rachel, I'll sort of just bat it off to you. When you think of created goods, material goods that have been disrupted by sexual sin, sexual brokenness, what are one of the first things that come to mind for you?
That's a great question, and I like your approach of talking about material goods as part of the disruption with creation. One of the first that comes to mind is technology. Pornography, I think, defines, and sexual sin in general defines how you interact with technology because that's our main portal, so to speak. The body comes to mind as well, and also just, I guess, the base philosophical question of what is nature for? Like, what is creation for? Is it for use or is it for stewarding? And reverence and and for tilling and growing and all of these more positive outcomes. But I think sexual sin teaches you that nature or creation, whether, natural or material goods, are for our use, and that's it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great overview of working towards what does restoration look like? Like how can we steward these things better? That's a great word that we can work towards as we have this conversation. But again, the reality is that sexual sin puts us into a sexualized lens. We put on our pornified glasses, and the world shifts. And in that world, our thoughts, our patterns, our actions do just become more selfish, more self-focused. Like you said, using things. Another word that comes to mind is just like grasping. It's easy to grasp at more created goods when you're living in a place with with a lack of security, lack of control. That's obviously a big piece of addictive tendencies, and we see control in so many other areas. But one of the things you mentioned right off the bat is technology, and I think our relationship with technology will always be skewed when it has this sexualized lens, because the reality is that technology brings us into more encounters with sex than we have probably originally planned or than our parents' generation had access to. I was having a conversation actually with my small group earlier today, and we got in a rant about just that you can't go on Netflix and find any show that doesn't have porn. That's what it is, like what some of these scenes are, with the amount of their friends that are like, hey, you should watch this show. And yeah, sure, it has some of this stuff, but you just sort of look past it and you just sort of keep watching. But there's a reality of through actual porn sites, through media that we consume, through every music video now that is a woman barely dressed dancing sexually, and again, soft porn like in music videos is sort of what's happening, that any sort of media becomes available to us on the same place where we have, let's say, previously consumed pornography. So if this is already a place I'm trying to fight, and then everywhere I go becomes a trigger, especially when it comes to technology, there's just a
Yeah.
disrupted relationship of what technology is meant to be used for at all, making it broken and hard to work with.
Yeah, 100%. And then what we are entertained by informs how we speak and informs how we interact with
Yeah.
people. And so I think we like to think about technology as kind of a separate thing or a separate life. Like our online quote unquote life is very separate from our in-person one. I have a lot of problems with that because I think technology's presence is so ubiquitous at this point, but um we can't distinguish like that. So if we're constantly consuming something or running into something or influenced by something online, we're going to be channeling that into our everyday life and interactions with others. Um, I was
Yeah.
I was talking with somebody who's in high school, just somebody in my life, and was just really shocked by how graphically they're speaking now. And these are really good kids. They're really solid at a great Catholic high school. And they just speak this way. And it's because they're trained by the media they're consuming to talk this way. And I think there was some of that when we were in high school. Like there was
For sure.
conversations and all this stuff, but I see it getting far worse and far more crass and base and um but I think it's because, yeah, there's this ubiquitousness to technology that influences our daily life.
Yeah. That influences literally every aspect of our daily life, and it can,
Hmm.
truthfully, I think it can make recovery from sexual sin, unwanted sexual behavior so difficult because so
Hmm.
much of your life can feel confined, like you described, within this online life. Because in
Yeah.
some sense, I mean, there's many ways that how we use technology defines how we act. But like one thing that comes to mind is I know people have heard of the term of like instant gratification, but you see that so much
Hmm.
in technology. I want to text back right away. I want to like right away. I'm going to Google something. I'm going to get the answer right away. I've heard there's some podcaster who talks all the time about how, like, I don't want to Google an answer. I just want my brain to, like, the wheels to turn for a second for me to think of it. When someone's like,
Yeah.
"Hey, what was that team that we played back in the day?" Instead of just like looking it up, like just letting your mind
Yeah.
actually work. But instead, because of the instant access that we have to internet, to Google, to AI that's giving us answers now, all sorts of things, we get this instant response for everything, which one just isn't real life, but two, that plays a huge role into areas of discipline that are needed for healing of sexual sin. When in every other area of my life, if I can have instantly the thing that I'm searching for, but then this area of sexual sin, I'm trying to deny myself pleasure when I could have access
Hmm.
to this thing instantly. It plays on this tension of what's so hard of trying to get out of this area and harmful tendencies in our life. What makes it so hard is because we've been trained so much by technology to get what we need, what we quote want, very instantly. And here we are, not able to do that when we are trying to fight this. So I just see those two things at odds with each other.
Absolutely. I think technology has severely damaged our ability to wonder, which is supposed to be our disposition again towards
Mm,
creation, is wonder, awe, and then stewardship coming from a place of that wonder. Um, and I like you're pointing out, technology just encourages instantaneousness. It encourages us to squash any natural curiosity we have, any wonder we have about
mm,
anything. Um, and I do think so much of healing is, and we can talk more about this later. I do think so much of healing and restoration in recovery is being able to cultivate a wonder and an ache again towards creation, towards the self, others, and God. So I think that's a restorative piece that technology also damages for us.
yes, for sure. As you speak about wonder, another, I'll say, sort of created good that comes to mind that sexual sin can disrupt, is both like finances and career. I think about, when you think as a little kid, you're filled with so much wonder of all the things you want to do with your life, right? What do you want to be when you're older? And I might have shared this on the podcast before, but when I was 5, here was my career goals. My first dream job was I wanted to be a priest. Now, hear me out. I wanted to be a priest because they wore pretty white dresses. Everybody had to listen to them when they spoke, and their job was only a weekend gig. So I was like, this is the best. But then I was like, what am I going to do with the rest of my week? So then I decided I would be an art teacher by day and an international traveling rock star by night. Those were my dreams when I was 5. There's this sense of wonder that comes with our childlikeness at that age, and then we get hit with reality of needing money to survive. And we could talk all sorts of things about just relationship with money in general. But I do think sexual sin is one of those things that comes sort of head to head or creates this disruption of how we view money and career. Because I know you've for sure had thoughts of things like this, but I think about news sources telling me how much OnlyFans models are making, how much sex sells throughout all of history. Women have made a business out of sex, of creating pornography, of prostitution. In some sense, like sex sells. And so
Yeah.
even our finances can and our career paths can come at odds with this sense of wonder. Forget childlike dreams of what you want to be. When this thing could promise you quote happiness by giving you money. And
Yeah.
that's why even recovery from some of these things can be so hard for women in our community who have experience in OnlyFans and sex work, because we're not just talking about
Yeah.
an unhealthy habit, we're also talking about their livelihood and their finances. And so I think that is also
Yeah.
a key created good that can be disrupted by sexual brokenness.
Yeah, I like this point because I think it's one that's not visited a lot is how pornography, sexual sin can inhibit our dreaming and our confidence in ourselves and what we're able to accomplish, especially as women, because women have always created careers out of sex because there's always demand, right? And because
Yeah.
opportunities for women were so limited, that it reached this disordered fever pitch in so many different cultures, just like it is in ours. And there's always demand, unfortunately. And so it just feeds the vices in both sexes. I think of, Les Mis, and we talked about this in our OnlyFans episode a little bit of like understanding how women end up in sex work. And Les Mis, the line, Jean Valjean says to Fantine, he says, how is it that you've come to grief in such a place as this? Of like, this is um, a career built on trauma, built on um, youth, on lack of confidence, on so many self-esteem issues, though it would posit otherwise, that this is liberating. But obviously we beg to differ. And I think even if you're not considering a career in sex work or something like that, I think I think sexual sin and the messages that it sends to women in their hearts does just affect like what am I capable of and what am I for, you know? And so I think it can affect career and finances and stuff in that meta sort of way of what am I actually for? Um, and if you're told over and over by the content you're consuming or by how you're being treated or how you treat others that you are just for sex and that's all you are for, then that's a huge distraction and detriment to these other areas of your life where um, not that your job is what you are for, but that, yeah, that those dreams and desires that God places on your heart are more you than the things that you get wrong. And we can lose sight of that for sure.
Yeah, yeah. What you're speaking to reminds me of Jay Stringer in his book Unwanted talks about one of the things that keeps us in sexual brokenness is this feeling of futility or purposelessness, right? So it's like if you're feeling this sense of purposelessness in your job, in your career, that can easily be a trigger for something like sexual sin. Or then you
Yeah.
can see this sexual like brokenness come into places of the workplace. And like one of
Yeah.
the stories that he gives examples of is basically a pastor whose porn use has gotten so bad that he was basically like, I don't care if people find out about it, so I'm going to start watching it on my work computer. And that was almost his cry for help that he ended up
Yeah.
getting
Exactly.
leave and then getting help. But I do think that's a common experience of ways that it can, yeah, provide even more brokenness in our life is I think it's easy to try to keep sexual sin is the private thing maybe that I do in my bedroom, but as many of us have experienced in journeys of sexual brokenness, that experience will find itself in other places. I know just in my own
Yeah.
journey of healing that as the issue got worse in my own life, what used to be a thing that I only did in the privacy of my bedroom, I would start to do when I was traveling on trips in hotels or when I was at a friend's house or places that I swore I would never do something like this, that as it
Yeah.
gets more worse and as I feel, yeah, more hopeless, less purpose, and feeling like my only purpose comes from this sort of pleasure and bringing this pleasure to others, there is this air of like, who really cares, you know? So
Yeah.
that I'm glad you bring that up. I do think that like loss of dreaming and that sense of purposelessness can be a major drive for a lot of these things.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think we've heard so many stories of alarm bells going off for women that we've worked with when they start consuming in the workplace or start acting out at their university or acting out outside of their home. Like, there's this kind of this wake up call, is that kind of like you're talking about with a cry for help. So I think that's huge. The way that, yeah, I think also a thought came to mind of just the how career and work, I guess, interplay with recovery is that like work takes work. Work means discipline, right? Like keeping a job for the most part, like even if it's the easiest job in the world, you still have to show up. And I think it's so hard when you're in the cycle of sexual sin or sexual compulsion and yeah, because you don't want to show up. You don't want to show up for anything. And it can really affect your mental health in that way. So there's also just a lack of commitment that you're suffering from when you lack commitment to recovery and to healing.
Yeah, Rachel, I think you're hitting the nail on the head for a lot of things and how much the workplace can be impacted by these areas of sexual
Yeah.
brokenness, and because the workplace for many people is their primary source of, I'll say, daily socialization of just being around other humans, and
Yeah.
another created good that I feel like has been distorted or disrupted by sexual sin that I want to mention too is just our relationship with clothing. So whether you're talking about how you dress in the workplace, even how that, I mean, that could be its own rant for a second. Can we talk about some of the clothes that are now normalized to like wear in the workplace? That if you were to like show our grandmas, they would be like, "You would net like your ankles are show," like that. That's how they dress going to work, and you see some of the like
Yeah.
outfits now, or even like the enemy comes after things that are very good, and women working can be a very good thing. And I think of like the image that comes to mind is think of how many Halloween costumes now are like the sexy version of something, but it's always the
Yeah, I
sexy
know.
version of like a woman at work, the sexy version
Always
of a
true.
nurse,
Yeah.
the sexy businesswoman, that has become the thing that is
Yeah.
distorted. But I do just know in my own life, like outside of like workplace stress, I know in my own life that the way that I have viewed clothing and the clothing that I've chosen has been drastically impacted by what I've seen in pornographic content and
Yeah.
in media that promotes over sexuality of the body. And so I know
Yes.
just so much of I just have this image in my head of years of me like looking in the mirror, but like turning at every single angle to make sure that, let's say, the more sexually appealing parts of me were on full display for
Mhm.
everyone to see so that I could be more desirable. Because that's sort of the
Right.
language that this stuff teaches, is that sexual women are more attractive, are more desired. And I want to be a
More
part of that. And
valuable.
I think clothing is one of those things that has come, yeah, it just in full play with that.
100%. Two thoughts come to mind with that. It's interesting to think about how you're talking about like the, sexy Halloween costumes, and usually it is women at work,
Yeah.
which is alarming. But so many themes in pornography are like the sexualization of everyday life, right?
Yes.
And everyday scenarios. I know you and I have encountered this. We talked a lot about this. Is like there's the basic like themes and scenes that kind of repeat themselves. But usually it is a sexualization of everyday life. So an example comes to mind of like a boss employee dynamic, and that's an ordinary dynamic in which you are in every day, and it can be a healthy, good relationship, right? A very normal relationship. And then porn loves to take things like that and just shoot, turn it. And so it makes it hard to exist in those relationships in your daily life. It makes it hard to just go to work. And that I think that's coming to mind too, of how there's something so insidious of that, of just twisting the everyday ordinary places we find ourselves. Um with clothing specifically, I'm thinking about how again, it's that question of what am I for, and dressing yourself, whether it's for work or for athletics or whatever. Like I'm in athletic shorts right now because I was on a long walk right before this, right? Because my body, that's me telling myself my body is, capable of this activity and I deserve to be comfortable while I'm doing it, right? Obviously there's limits with that. But um
Yeah.
but dressing for work is I'm good at this job, I'm professional, I'm presentable, and all these things, and I'm dressing in such a way that promotes that. I'm confident in myself. I deserve to be here, like that kind of thing. And so yes, pornography damages relationship with how you dress yourself because it tells you over and over that in any context you are for sexual appeal and that's it.
Yes.
And that's all you're for. So in any context, you need to make that work, whether that's work, home, the gym, whatever. You need to dress in such a way that you widen that appeal as much as possible. So yeah, the damage there is rampant.
Yeah, absolutely. And it continues to turn yourself inward. It becomes
Mhm.
selfish and becomes self-conscious in every circumstance. Maybe I shared this story with you guys, but I was feeling a lot of things when I went to an Easter Vigil Mass lately, and I saw several
Early.
of like high school girlies that I work with in just less clothing that I would feel comfortable wearing to mass. And one
Yeah.
of the telltale signs of this was their constant maneuvering to feel more comfortable. And
Yeah.
I do think it's that self conscious, that overly self conscious. Like look at self, look at clothing, can be a huge disruption in
Mhm.
place of like sexual brokenness that we have all experienced. Because in some sense, then my lens becomes everybody is constantly looking at me, looking at my body, and looking at what my body
Right.
can do. And so when I'm wearing minimal clothing, I'm constantly adjusting it. You see it all the time. If a woman wears a dress that's too short and she stands up and she tries to
Mhm.
hike it down, or when there are straps or things moving around, like constantly adjusting it. Like even that, I
Mhm.
think, is a great like telltale sign of like, okay, this woman is aware of how this thing is resting on her body. She's aware that other people are
Mhm.
looking at her. But I just know in my own life, one of the ways that this has been so disrupted is my thought pattern for years and years is I would go out and my thought was completely on how are other people viewing me? I'm not even listening to what Joe Schmo was telling me about, I'm like thinking in college, what
Mhm.
are you majoring in? I don't know. I'm not listening. I'm like, how am I standing right now? Am I appearing in a way that's attractive? Like
Mhm.
is this shirt like fitting me right? Like these are thought patterns that are going through my head. And I know when I share
Mhm.
that this is a common experience to many people in different seasons of life, but just because
Yeah.
of content that I've consumed that yes, that taught me that I am made for sex, then the way
Mhm.
that I'm presenting myself, I'm constantly aware and overly self-conscious of that fact and just aware of how other people are viewing that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think the tells that you're talking about are really important because one of the problems again with pornography and the lens it creates is that constantly under the microscope of others feeling of everybody's always looking at me. And I actually think modesty narratives gone wrong can do that too. Of everybody's always looking at me, so don't get it wrong, right?
yes.
And rather than like, okay, are you comfortable in your body? Are you honoring of your body? Like, do you understand like the multifaceted purposes of your body and how good it is? And are you sitting in that? Are you in your body,
Yeah.
comfortable, happy, content, confident? Um, and like, I think that's a really important question with dress is like, am I comfortable in this whether anybody looks at me or not? Am I happy in this? Am I like, because I think that's what's missing in those two pendulum swings of like constantly being under the gaze of other people. Like we're missing ourselves. We're missing like, am I just in my own body? Like for crying out loud, am I here? Because that's what
Yeah.
pornography takes from us first is this integrated relationship with our own bodies and its purposes. So totally agree.
The Magdala podcast is sponsored by the Catholic Theology Show, presented by Ave Maria University. The Catholic Theology Show covers themes such as the value of a Catholic higher education, religious liberty, how to pray, the philosophies of St. Thomas Aquinas, and more. Stream episodes on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and learn more by visiting the link below.
Yeah, and that hyperfixation on the body, I think, also plays into this other created good that I know is the experience of so many women in our community. And like my own experience, I talk about this a lot, but like the created good of food, our relationships with
Yeah.
food, that's completely related to our struggles with sexual brokenness, right? Like in
Yeah.
simple, right? Like sexual brokenness impacts the way we view the body, and in adjusting to how we view the body, food is one of the main things that can contribute to that. I remember when I was just sort of beginning into let's say like my second year of like disordered eating disorders when I was young, I came across the Instagram photo of abs are made in 80% the kitchen and 20% the
Right.
gym. And at that time I was the fifth grader who was over exercising in my room. But I saw that and I was like, oh, that's the key. It's food. And yes, as a registered dietitian, the way you lose weight is a calorie deficit. That's how it works. And so food can be a part of that. So yes, like there's science behind it. But I do think that sexual sin and this disruption of how we view the body then negatively impacts the way that we view food. Because very simply, it, eating too much, like the thought pattern then goes like food is bad because food can make me fat, and then if I'm fat I'm less desirable. Like those are the thought patterns that can follow. And so that's why, I mean, so many of the women in our community, I was literally on a phone call right before this with a prospective woman looking to join group, who shared vulnerably that she is in treatment for eating disorder recovery right now. She was like, do you think anyone will be able to relate? I was like, girl, I think everyone will be able to relate to that. You are not alone by any means, but that seems to be a common overlap with many women in our community, that this also seems to be a struggle in their life.
Yeah, there's even research on that. There's one out of I'm trying to think of what their institution is, but Patrick Carney is one of the leading kind of first sexual addiction therapists, we'll put it that way. And he had a study talking about just co-aggravating issues with sexual addiction among men and women. And I think I think disordered eating was about 60% of women who struggle with
Yeah.
sexual addiction also struggle with a form of disordered eating.
Yeah, I believe it.
And um, it makes perfect sense when we think about the interplay between those two struggles, kind of like what you're saying. And I think we've done I don't know. Diet culture, workout culture, fitness culture in general can get so disordered too because we give blanket advice without any sort of tailored. And I know this is part of why you became the dietitian, is because even saying something like calorie deficits, like, well, it's relative to like who the person is, what their lifestyle is, like, and just all of
Yes,
these things
yes.
going on. So it's like, I think, yeah, we gave such blanket advice in service of like, let's just get people thin. And we gave no regard for, okay, who is this person? What is their lifestyle? What's their activity level? What do they like to eat? What's their history of all these things. What are their health issues that they're facing? We don't pay attention to that. We just are like we all just get into this like conveyor belt of let's all be desirable, thin equals desirable, and that's totally a pornographic conveyor belt that we're still on. But anyway, I know that the relationship with food is not one that's part of my story, and I'm grateful. But I actually wrote something recently on this of how being postpartum and
Yeah.
feeling and experiencing the narratives of like get your old body back. And it's like, well, why? And just like, that was kind of part of my healing as a mom is like, well,
Yeah.
why? Like this body's had children and I can love and
Mm.
honor that and take care of this body. But this like you have to get this body back or else. And it's like, or else what? And the answer I do think on the other end of that is, or else you're not attractive anymore. Um, and the counter to that is always, well, like, well, I think I am. I think I'm beautiful. I'm grateful my body has had
Mm.
children and that I can take care of it. And the only man in the world who I care about his opinion of my appearance also thinks I'm beautiful and is grateful I've had his children. So I think
Yeah.
there's, uh, but that I find that behind that narrative of like actually like it's driving mothers to be, I know this is like in, sort of related, but it's driving mothers to be kind of still, yeah, hyperfixated on what does everybody think of my body and what I look like rather than, okay, how do I feel about my body in this new season and and do I just let, again, one person's opinion be enough in that like sacred relations within my marriage? Is that enough for me that this person thinks I am lovely and beautiful at all times? And so I don't know. I think there's a lot of fear there still for women that I find in other spaces too.
Yes, yes. It's very clear that this idealized form of the body in the culture is meant to try to, I mean, make people money for one, but it is meant
Yeah.
to make women feel out of control. I think that's one of the main pieces that gets at. And then when you're involved in sexual sin, that makes you feel out of control. All sorts of addictive tendencies, like all research points to like that key word, right? You're seeking control. And so it makes sense if you feel out of control of one area of your life, you're trying to find control in other areas of your life. So whether, again, that is food or like health sort of things with your body or clothing, like any of these things we mentioned, it comes from this good place of like, I want to be in a place of security and stability. That is what the Lord wants for all of us. And then in our broken humanity, that becomes grasping at, I'm in control and I can just fix this. So if I just calorie count everything, then this will be
Yeah.
fixed. If I just make more than enough money to feel, quote, stable, then like this will be fixed, right? All if I can
Right.
control these material things, then I don't have to actually yeah, fix what's going on underneath. But as we shift
Hmm.
into like what does restoration look like in these areas, I do think control was one of those things I want to highlight that
Yeah.
in a lot of places of disorder in our own life. And when I mean disorder, I mean like against the natural order, like the things that just feel rocky, feel out of place, comes from this sense of feeling out of control. And so instead of thinking of the word control, I like, words security or stability. So like asking the question of like
Hmm.
what is stabilizing for you and how can you work towards a stabilizing relationship with technology, with food, with all of these created goods. Because very simply, the creator only makes good things. So these in their essence are good, can be used for evil. So how can we use these good things and how can we steward these good things in a way that is secure and stabilizing without grasping for control? I feel like that's a big question that
Hmm.
we have to ask.
Hmm. Yeah. I think control. I became aware of how deeply control was an idol in my life in when I began recovery. So I completely resonate with that.
Mm.
Um, I think I go back to the cultivating wonder and cultivating awe, and I think that goes for all of the categories that we've discussed. Is if we can just learn to just slowly and patiently reorder our relationship with curiosity, with wonder, towards material things. Of it's not there to be just useful and um instantaneous, like we talked about with technology specifically, but rather like just appreciating the thing for what it is. I think restores a lot of good. Now technology, y'all know I don't like super appreciate it in general, but I think with
Yeah.
food, that's actually a great one. A great example is like cultivating a sense of gratitude for nourishment, for food that tastes good, food that you like, and letting it be what it is instead of worrying about the question of like, oh my gosh, what is this for? Like, how can I control this? How can I control outcomes with
Yeah.
this? I think clothing's the same thing of like, how can I dress in a way that I just really like I enjoy,
Yeah.
it's fun for me rather than again controlling outcome of I can use this thing to get this thing. Um, this outcome that I want. So creating a disposition of how can I just wonder at this? How can I be like naturally curious, not in a vicious way, but how can I be curious towards this thing? Have a disposition even of like levity or playfulness towards this, um, and gratitude for this thing rather than how can I use this material good to get the outcome that I'm wanting.
Yeah, for sure. And what you're describing is a very what a balanced life looks like. That
Mhm.
the virtue often rests in the middle. So good like examine in a lot of these things is like, okay, if God only makes good things, that means like clothing in itself can be a good, it covers us, it keeps us warm, it is a way for us to express
Mhm.
personality. Like there's a lot of good things. Food is a good. The Lord wants to nourish us. He gives us
Mhm.
himself as food. And so he comes to us
Right.
as food. So that means food is a good. So these things, so it's like, so if we have one extreme view, which is these things are horrible and bad, okay, so that's a good thing to take to prayer. Or when we
Right.
make idols of these things, right? Like food is the most important thing, and I have to perfectly measure out every single thing that I'm eating, and I can't eat any processed, slightly fast foods. That like all of that is a sign of what we call disordered eating, and so those are
Right.
good things to look at, and we all fall in extremes of both of these things. So I definitely don't say any of these things in condemning words. Like, I mean, we could look at all of the categories that we've just named, and we could both
Right.
name ways that we fall in one extreme or another.
For sure.
But even as we think about relationship with created goods, especially in relationship to like sexual sin, a good sort of reflection space is just that. Like, do I feel balanced in this area of my life? Am I leaning towards a certain extreme of either idolizing or demonizing this thing? Because that's not what
Mhm.
any of these things are. Or I think about how we talked about like career and finances. I think it's very easy to idolize those sort of things. If you ever talk to college students, that's all they're thinking about, right? It's like,
Oh yeah.
how am I going to make the best salary? How am I going to move up in my career as fast as possible? Are those bad questions to ask? No, but if they are your driving source, then that could be a place of idolization and something to look at. Because again, the Lord wants your wholeness, so any sort of out of balance area of your life, for sure, also affects this other area of your life, which is your sexuality, which is also just your humanity, your sexual drive, your passions. You were talking about like creativity, or
Mhm.
when we talk about the passions, like the Greek word like eros, like yes, usually relating to sexuality, but eros just being like the holy passions. Like, what are these things
Oh
that
yeah.
drive you? This relates to every area of your life. So I'm sort of bouncing in a few different places, but I guess what I'm getting at is like the Lord is after your wholeness, and so do you feel balanced in all of these areas of your life? Because odds are you
Mhm.
don't, especially if you feel out of balance in the realm of sexual sin. It probably is bleeding into your
Yeah.
relationship with a lot of these created goods. And so it'd be good to
Yeah.
look at a lot of these areas because some of them might be more out of place than you think and could actually be either a big source of
Yeah.
trigger for sexual sin or could be like the factor that sort of keeps you in that place. So that's why it's important just to look at a whole picture, a holistic picture.
Absolutely. I don't think you're bouncing around. I think you're getting at really important stuff here because um, kind of what you said, the last bit there makes me think of a very easy way to find something that perhaps has gotten off track or disordered in your relationship with material goods or creation is what do you feel like you can't say no to? What do you feel like again that
Yeah.
yeah, the out of control, destabilized feeling? What in your life do you feel like you can't say no to? I'm thinking of a recent discussion where I was just talking with a group of women about triggers and it's like, well, is your phone in your room at night? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, well that's a pretty easy boundary to set for yourself. Is
Yeah.
plug your phone into your kitchen. And they're like, I can't do that, that's too hard. It's like, okay, well then I don't think you can be surprised. Like you know what I mean? So it's like, what do you feel like you can't say no to? Is text so I mean in that example it's tech, but it's like is your smartphone so embedded into your life that you can't set boundaries with it, because that's a very we shouldn't have that with anything. Or is clothing, are you spending so much money on clothing that like you can't say no? Like, okay, well then you may have something compulsory there too, or an attachment that you shouldn't have. So I think finding these things that we feel like we can't say no to is a really good way to find like where am I having a disposition of use towards this thing? Because use creates attachment. So what can I how can I lessen that? And with the phone in the bedroom, yes, you can plug it in the kitchen, get an alarm clock, it will be okay. I promise. But anyway, um,
Amen.
that's a whole different thing.
No, thank you for that. I mean, we could talk a while on just technology, but even as you share that, I do want to speak that like real restoration in these areas does mean acknowledging weakness in these areas. You cannot get anywhere if you think you've already mastered this. So being able to humbly say, "Wow, I don't have control over my phone." I'll make the public announcement. I finally got a wise phone. I did it, and I remember talking to my mom when I was looking to switch over and basically saying how hard it was for me to not look at email on my phone. And she was like, "Can't you just, trying to share some of these things?" And she means so well. I love my mother so much,
Yeah.
and it was like a place of humility. Shout out, Jan. It was a place of humility to be like, I actually think I'm too weak to say no to my email. I'm not saying that you have to get a wise phone, blah, blah, blah. None of those things. But I'm saying like the measures that I then took came from a place of humility of saying, I actually don't think I can say no to this right now. I wish I had more
Mhm.
self-control in this area, but I don't. I've probably shared this example before, but when I was struggling with eating disorders for so long, one of my biggest trigger foods was Nutella. And so there were years in my life that I couldn't have Nutella in my house. I remember going over to a friend's house once or twice and like asking if they had it in their house and like politely asking them to like hide it. Again, this takes like extreme humility, but I knew that if I had access to Nutella in a certain season of my life, that I would eat the entire jar and feel horrible about it and then force myself to throw up. And then like the cycle continues and all the shame. So I knew that that was a place of extreme weakness, and it took extreme humility to say that it was a place of weakness. And so, real restoration in this area, I mean, just to speak transparently, like there are for sure still areas in both mine and Rachel's life where we are weak in these sort of areas or other areas. And
Yep.
restoration is not that we have perfected our relationship with the body, with food, with clothing, but it's that we recognize when we are weak in one area. We're gonna seek wholeness, and in humility, we ask for help where we need help, and move forward from there. So real restoration starts with, man, humility is hard, man. It is hard. But the call of a
Hard.
Christian. So we're working on that one.
It is hard. And having honest conversations with those close to you about those areas of weakness. Like I have a
Yeah.
couple friends who in this postpartum season I talk very honestly with about our relationships with food and fitness, just because we know it's a vulnerable point as your body is going through these massive shifts. And I think that is really important for restoration too, is being able to have ongoing honest conversations always with people about recovery. But as you kind of learn how to have order or stability in your life surrounding these places of use, surrounding these material things, I think it's really important to, open that up to people.
Yeah, amen. And as we round out just this whole conversation on all these different relationships that have been impacted by sexual sin, I just feel like a closing word I want to share, and then Rachel, if you have any closing words you want to share, but I just feel like a word from the Lord is that Jesus is after your wholeness. This means your relationship with Him, your relationship with others, your relationship with self, your relationship with all of these material goods. Jesus is after your wholeness, and there's no part of you that He wants to leave like in the desert. That every part of you He is bringing to restoration, and that is hard work on your end. But guess what? It's probably even harder work on His end, and He can handle it. So you can just give your work to Him, and then He can do the rest of the work. But especially as we talk about some of these topics today that I know are just really present in the lives of a lot of our women, just the closing reminder that
Mhm.
Jesus is after your wholeness and he's never going to stop fighting for that. And so none of these
Yeah.
areas are too far gone, too scary for him to go to, or something that he doesn't care about, because he does, because he wants your wholeness. That is my closing thought. Rachel, do you have any closing thoughts to our friends on this series that we are completing?
Oh, yeah, crazy. I think what comes to mind is just that everybody is doing this, not just those struggling with sexual
Yes.
sin or compulsion or addiction. Everybody is working out their salvation in fear and trembling. We have all experienced the results of the fall and this disordered relationship with these four categories. And so I think everybody's doing this. We're all in the same boat here. And um, so I think it's important to talk about the specifics of how certain sins can impact um, these relationships, but yeah, every sin impacts it in a different way, and we're all here. So I think having that faith that we're all journeying together, that hope that comes with that, but also maybe a bit of the humility and again, kind of a little bit more lightheartedness of like, okay, I'm not alone in this disruption. I'm part of a whole pilgrim church working its way towards home, and I can be patient with that process because God is patient with us in that process too.
Yeah. We have all fallen short, and yet God is abundant in mercy. So if only we had another podcast episode talking about mercy
My word,
soon.
that's
Oh,
happening.
foreshadowing. That might be
And
happening.
I'm
Anyways,
recording this.
tune in to our next episode about mercy, and talk to you all soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Check out more podcast episodes, blog posts, and how to get involved with Magdala by visiting our website, magdalaministries.org. Your love is meant to change the world. We hope to see you soon.